They're trying to spin it right now that, hey, it's all done. Yeah. You know, hey, look, it's mostly gone. It's all been weathered, and God, you'd hardly notice anything ever happen. Well, that's a load of crap. And we've been lied to about this thing more or less from the beginning. I talked about the fish that have the light organs, the photophores that they signal with, and they are the dominant fish in a community that lives in the ocean. It's the largest biomass of life on our Earth. It's known as the deep scattering layer. And it's a huge aggregation of life forms that lives below the cusp of perpetual darkness in the ocean, which means during daytime, they're down below light, usually below 1,000 feet. And they rise with sunset, and they rise with night, just below the edge of night, until by nightfall, they are up at the surface, or sometimes right up at the surface. And virtually everything we know of the sunlit sea, the whales, the dolphins, most of the fish we eat or catch, the seabirds, the turtles, the sharks, the billfish, the predatory fish, they all live, most of them make their living hunting the deep scattering layer. Virtually all of them are nocturnal hunters that wait for this great dumb waiter of sea flute to rise from the deep every night, and they either dive down to meet it. Some of them even specialize on diving down and catching it in the day, making extremely deep dives. The biggest problem in the Gulf of Mexico with what has happened is the fact that from the very beginning, BP was hitting that wellhead at 5,000 feet deep with chemical dispersants. And the problem is they took what was a source point of pollution of a buoyant pollutant, namely oil, that would really have risen to the surface where it could have been skimmed or scooped, right? And what they did was they hit it at the wellhead, they dispersed it so effectively that it's now formed these vast underwater plumes that are in essence neutrally buoyant, may never ever rise to the surface, will never be collectible, can never be brought back in. They took a source point pollution, they made it a non-source point pollution, and it's down there, and this huge foundational biomass of the ocean, the deep scattering layer, has to migrate through these plumes twice a day. Well, what does that tell you? And already some of the people who are looking at this are finding that these plumes are trapping the deep scattering layer. These plumes move in. I mean, I've talked with researchers who've been diving out there and researchers who've dived down in clear water, done their work on the bottom for 30 minutes, and on their way up, they've encountered oil that moved in, a plume that moved in, and they've had to come up through oil. The deep scattering layer, these animals are going to be trapped beneath the plumes and unable to get up to the surface to feed, or they're going to have gotten up there and be trapped and unable to get back away from the predators of the day who are going to come out and get them. So BP can say, and NOAA can say that this oil is gone, but it is not gone. It's all still out there. It's just massively dispersed. It's tiny, tiny little droplets now, and it's also mixed with dispersant, which very well may be more toxic than either the oil or the dispersant alone. So it's a pretty dreadful situation, and the bottom line as to why did BP hit the wellhead with all this dispersant, and the truth is they know, based on the Exxon Valdez reality, that their legal liability is going to depend on somewhere between $1,000 and about $4,500 per barrel of legal liability for oil spilled. And if they hit that oil at the wellhead, who's going to say how much oil ever came out of that thing? So it's a way of disguising the real truth of how much oil came out of that reservoir before they capped it. That's the only explanation, and it's essentially a criminal act, in my opinion. The problem is, that the Gulf of Mexico was already one of the most stressed out ocean ecosystems on Earth. Many endangered species barely holding on. We know that about 1,600 sperm whales live in the northern Gulf of Mexico, maybe never leave, that they feed on squid in the deep scattering layer. And they specifically feed in an area right in the Mississippi Canyon, right around the Deepwater Horizon wellhead. We know that critically endangered western bluefin tuna would have spawned in the Gulf right around the Deepwater Horizon wellhead at the time of the blowout. And we also know that the adults are very deep divers, and they dive down into the deep scattering layer in the daytime. They make dives of over 3,000 feet deep in search of critters of the deep scattering layer. Some of these species and some of these ecosystems may never recover from these assaults that have been launched as a result of this really reckless, reckless pirating of the deep. We have so little, we don't even look at what we're doing down there. There's no environmental impact statement for the deep sea floor out there. And, we just act like it doesn't matter. And I hope this will change that. The one positive that might come out of this is that we'll actually reconsider the ocean beyond our sight, the horizon far from shore, and the deep water column that really supports all the life of the ocean that we love so much. I don't like to fall to pessimism, because then you just quit. So I prefer to keep working and trying to think of ways, and I honestly believe that we have it in our power to change all of these things. We actually know the answers. It's not like we're sitting there scratching our heads going, God, what do we do about that? We know exactly what to do about all of these problems, and it really is a matter of collective will and to a large extent political will. Ideally, we would make it illegal to ever use chemical dispersants again and make that stick somehow. That would be issue number one. For the marshlands that lie at the mouth of the Mississippi River, the Louisiana marshlands, which was where most of the television coverage and most of the print media coverage was focused. And those marshlands are basically the womb of the Gulf of Mexico. It's the nursery ground for everything, all the fish and shellfish and oysters and you name it, almost all of it happens in those marshlands. Those marshlands were under terrible threat before the oil spill. And they were losing something like a football field every 30 minutes was being destroyed. So the best thing we could do for that area, the womb of the ocean, to allow these larval, teeny little fish to go in and have their little babyhood in the protected nursery of the marshes, would be to sort of let open the floodgates of the Mississippi River. So if you look at Google Earth images or satellite images of the mouth of the Mississippi River, it doesn't look natural, and it isn't, because we've basically taken the river and we're driving it through canals that are shooting it very fast right past the marshlands out into the deep water. So this enables all the shipping of the Mississippi to come and go easily, and they don't have to worry about navigating, shifting shoals and sandbars and all those treacherous things that lie at the mouths of big rivers. But it's been at the cost of these marshlands, which rely on the sediment. They rely on the decomposing landmass of North America that gets, run downstream on the flowing waters to be deposited in the delta. And so this would help, first of all, remediate the problems of the oil spill, because the only thing that's going to really happen eventually is sediment is going to overlie the oil and just bury it into that geological layer. And I know the Gulf Restoration Network, which is a really good group that's been working down there on these kind of things, and they've been asking for that for a long time. Let's let open the floodgates of the Mississippi and let the river, at least somewhat more than it currently is, let it off the chain and let it just carry these sediments down and deposit and rebuild up the delta, rebuild up all the islands and the marshlands that are so important to all the life of the Gulf of Mexico. So those would be two important things: no more dispersant and open the floodgates of the Mississippi. Those would help remediate not only this problem, but a lot of other problems that have been plaguing the Gulf of Mexico.